You're standing at the bottom of a staircase. 12 steps, maybe 14, and you've already walked 2 miles today, so this should be nothing. Somewhere around step 8, your thighs report something they never report on flat ground. And what they're reporting isn't tiredness. Here's the plain answer to the question. Walking trains the slow, low-force half of your leg, and never once asks the fast, high-force half for anything. And the fast half is the half going quiet. But that answer alone will get you nowhere, and I want to be honest about why. The fast fibers aren't the cause, they're the casualty. The real loss is in the wiring, a population of nerve cells in your lower spine that switch off one at a time, over years, handing their abandoned muscle fibers to neighbors that can't drive them properly. Miss that, and you'll add hills to your walk, or hand weights, or another 30 minutes a day, and wonder in 2 years why the stairs still feel exactly the same. So let's find out where you actually stand. Do this now if you're somewhere you can. Get a firm dining chair, seat around 17 inches off the floor, no arms if you have the choice, and put the back of it against a wall. Sit forward so your spine is off the backrest, feet flat, heels underneath your knees, arms folded across your chest so your hands cannot help you. Stand all the way up, sit all the way down, and repeat as many times as you can in 30 seconds. Count out loud. The numbers you're comparing against come from Roberta Reichley and Jared Jones, who built the senior fitness test in the late 1990s from thousands of community-dwelling adults across dozens of American sites. Their middle-of-the-range figure for a man in his early 60s is 14 to 19 repetitions in 30 seconds. For a woman in her early 60s, 12 to 17. Below that band, and you're not diseased, you're not frail, you're not finished, you're under-recruited, which is a completely different problem with a completely different fix. Here's what should bother you about that test. Someone who walks 5 miles a day and someone who walks half a mile a day often score within 1 or 2 repetitions of each other. Tell me your 30-second count in the comments and tell me roughly how far you walk on an average day. I want to see whether the two numbers track at all, because in the research they barely do, and I suspect the comment section is going to prove it faster than any paper. So why doesn't the walking transfer? There are 3 explanations most people reach for, and I want to take each one seriously before I take it apart, because 2 of them are half right and the half that's right matters. The first explanation, you're not walking enough, or not fast enough. Now walking is not useless, and I have no patience for content that pretends otherwise. The Life Trial, Lifestyle Interventions and Independence for Elders, enrolled 1,635 adults aged 70 to 89, across 8 American universities and ran a structured walking program at about 150 minutes a week for an average of 2.5 years, published in JAMA in 2014. The walk-in group had meaningfully less major mobility disability, defined as losing the ability to walk 400 meters. That is a real result, and I'm not going to shrink it. But look at what walking protected. Walking protected walking. The 400-meter test is an endurance measurement. Can this person keep a low-level task going for 6 or 7 minutes? Nothing in that measurement asks your leg to produce a large force quickly. And the thing that fails when someone can't get off a low sofa, can't climb onto a curb without a hand on the car door, can't catch themselves when a rug slides, is not endurance. It's force, delivered fast, once. The second explanation, it's muscle mass. Everyone has heard the sarcopenia figure. You lose 3 to 8% of muscle mass per decade after 30. That number is roughly right. It's also close to irrelevant to your problem, and the study that showed it best is one of the most useful things in the whole field. The Health, Aging, and Body Composition study followed nearly 2,000 older adults in Pittsburgh and Memphis, scanning their thigh muscle and testing their knee strength repeatedly over 3 years. Strength fell roughly 3 times faster than muscle mass did. And here's the finding that should be on the wall of every gym that markets to people over 60. The participants who gained muscle mass over those 3 years still lost strength. They built more tissue and got weaker anyway. Researchers gave the phenomenon its own name because the old word had stopped describing it. Sarcopenia means loss of muscle flesh. Dynapenia, the term Brian Clark and Todd Manini proposed in 2008, means loss of muscle force that isn't explained by loss of muscle flesh. You are almost certainly dealing with the second one. Your thigh has more meat on it than your strength suggests, which means the meat is there and something has stopped calling for it. The third explanation, It's the knees, the hips, the arthritis. This one earns real credit. There's a well-documented reflex called arthrogenic muscle inhibition, where a swollen or painful knee joint sends signals up the spinal cord that actively suppress the quadriceps on that leg. Not pain avoidance, not choice, measurable suppression of the muscle's own activation, sometimes 20 or 30%, even when the person is trying maximally. Anyone who has had a knee scoped and watched that thigh shrink in 11 days has seen the reflex work. But arthrogenic inhibition can't be the main answer, because the same weakening happens in people whose joints don't hurt at all. Pain-free knees, clean x-rays, 5,000 steps a day, and the chair test still comes back at 10, which forces the question into the only place left. If it isn't the miles, and it isn't the mass, and it isn't the joints, what's left is the wire between the spine and the muscle. Every voluntary movement you make starts in a cell called an alpha motor neuron, sitting in the anterior horn of your spinal cord, the front section of gray matter, in your case the lumbar region, roughly level with the bottom of your rib cage. One alpha motor neuron sends a single long axon down your leg, splits it into hundreds of branches, and each branch ends on one muscle fiber. That neuron plus every fiber it owns is called a motor unit, and it is the smallest thing your nervous system can switch on. You cannot contract half a motor unit. It fires completely or not at all. In your quadriceps, one motor neuron might command anywhere from a few hundred to over 1,000 individual fibers, which means the death of a single nerve cell in your spine takes 1,000 perfectly healthy muscle fibers out of service at the same instant, even though those fibers are still sitting there, still fed by blood, still visible on a scan, still counted as muscle mass by the machine that measures your body composition. That's your dynapenia. That's why the scan says you have muscle, and the chair says you don't. Now the part that decides everything about which motor units you keep. In 1957, Elwood Henneman, working at Harvard, published a finding in Science that turned out to be one of the few genuinely universal laws in movement biology. Motor units are recruited in strict order of size, smallest first, every time. Not by choice, not by intention, not by focus. Small, weak, fatigue-resistant units switch on first and handle low-force work. Only when those small units can't produce enough force does your nervous system reach up and call the large, fast, powerful units. The physical model I want you to carry for the rest of this is an electricity grid. A utility runs baseload plants, cheap, steady, always on, covering the ordinary demand of an ordinary Tuesday. And it keeps peaking plants, which are expensive, fast to spin up, and only fired when demand spikes on the coldest morning of the year. Your slow motor units are baseload. Your fast motor units are the peaking plants. Walking on flat ground is a mild Tuesday. It draws maybe 20 to 30% of your leg's maximum capacity, and the baseload covers all of it without ever calling anything else. And what does a utility do with a peaking plant nobody calls for a decade? It decommissions it. Not out of malice, out of arithmetic. Nervous tissue is metabolically the most expensive material in your body, and a motor neuron maintaining 1,000 branches to fibers that never get used is a standing cost against no return. That's why the daily walk fails you specifically. Walking isn't neutral. Walking is a daily demonstration to your nervous system that the high-force half of your leg is surplus. If that just reframes something, subscribe now, because the next layer explains what happens to those 1,000 orphaned fibers after the neuron that owned them goes offline, and it's stranger and more hopeful than the part you've just heard. It's about 4 minutes away, and it's the reason I wanted to make this in the first place. So what happens to a muscle fiber when the nerve that commanded it dies? For a while, nothing good. A denervated fiber sits there, twitching randomly, chemically shouting for a connection. And then, this is the remarkable part, a neighboring motor neuron, one that's still alive, grows a new branch across the gap and adopts it. Collateral sprouting, your body performs an unsupervised rescue operation on itself for decades and never tells you, except the adoption comes with a cost, and the cost is precision. Picture a village school with 15 teachers and 30 children each. 5 teachers leave, nobody closes the school, and nobody loses a child. The 10 remaining teachers absorb everyone, and now they're running classes of 45. Every child still gets taught. Nothing subtle gets taught at all. That's your leg. The surviving motor units get bigger and clumsier. Fine gradations of force disappear. And when the rescuing neuron is a slow one, which it usually is, because slow neurons survive better, The fast fibers it adopts get retrained as slow fibers. Your fast tissue doesn't vanish, it gets converted. You can see the conversion under a microscope. A muscle biopsy from a 25-year-old stained for fiber type looks like a chessboard, fast and slow scattered next to each other in an even mosaic. The same stain on a 75-year-old shows continents, great blocks of identical fiber types sitting together because each block is one enormous motor unit that swallowed its neighbors. Pathologists call it fiber type grouping, and it is the fingerprint of a leg that's been rewiring itself for 30 years. How much of the wiring goes? Estimates for motor unit number estimation, an electrical technique that infers how many units are still working in a muscle, suggest that by the 7th decade, a typical person has lost something like a third of the motor units in the tibialis anterior, the muscle on the front of your shin that lifts your toes. In the 8th decade, the loss steepens sharply. I'll be straight with you about the limits here. The different methods disagree with each other, sometimes by wide margins, and the people who spend their careers on this are still arguing about which technique tells the truth. The direction of the finding is not in dispute, the precise numbers are. There's one more piece of hardware failing. At the very end of the wire, where a nerve branch meets a muscle fiber, there's a junction, the neuromuscular junction, that works like a pressure plate wired to a doorbell. In a young leg, the plate is a single tight pretzel shape, nerve ending and muscle receptor field locked in register. In an aging leg, the plate fragments into islands, and nerve and muscle drift slightly out of alignment. The signal still arrives. Some of it lands on nothing. Read that again, because it changes what weakness even means. Your leg isn't tired, and it isn't wasted. Parts of it have gone partly deaf, and other parts never get called. Holding the junction together is a protein called agrin, released by the nerve, which tells the muscle where to keep its receptors. An enzyme called neurotrypsin cuts agrin, and the fragment shows up in blood. Researchers have proposed it as a marker of junction breakdown. Whether that blood marker predicts anything useful in an individual person is genuinely unsettled, and I wouldn't pay for the test today. Now, why does any of this show up as a stumble rather than as fatigue? Because of a measurement almost nobody outside sports science ever hears: rate of force your leg can produce, how much force it can produce in the first fraction of a second. When your toe catches a lifted paving slab, your body has roughly 200 to 300 milliseconds to generate a recovery step before your center of mass passes the point of no return. 200 milliseconds is shorter than a blink. Maximum strength is irrelevant in that window. You never reach maximum. What matters is the slope of the force curve in the first tenth of a second, and that slope is produced almost entirely by the large, fast motor units, the ones your daily walk has been quietly telling your spinal cord it doesn't need. Here's the recognition beat. Think of the last time you caught yourself. A curb, a wet tile, a step you didn't know was there. You stayed upright, but there was a half beat of lag, a moment where your leg felt like it was arriving late to its own emergency. That lag is rate of force development, and it is measurable, and it is trainable, and almost nothing in ordinary daily life trains it. This is also why muscle power falls off a cliff while strength declines gently. Strength, the biggest weight you can move slowly, drops modestly per year past 60. Power, force multiplied by speed, falls roughly twice as fast. So the 68-year-old who can still push a heavy sofa across a room might not be able to stand from that sofa without rocking forward twice to build momentum. Two different capacities. Everyone trains the one they're not losing. Let's test the one you are losing. Sit back in that chair. Instead of counting repetitions, do one repetition as fast as you physically can. Explode out of the seat and stand tall. Now notice two things. Did you have to rock backwards first to swing forward? And did your heels feel like they pressed the floor? Or did the effort live in the front of your thighs and the balls of your feet? A leg with intact fast units drives through the heel and leaves the seat in under a second with no windup. A leg that's been living on baseload for a decade builds momentum first, because momentum is what you use when you can't produce force quickly. If you needed the rock, that's information, not a verdict. Here's the work. The drill is a chair power stand, and the entire training effect lives in the first half second. So precision matters more than effort. Chair against a wall, seat around 17 inches. Sit forward, spine off the backrest. Feet flat, hip width, toes turned out about 15 degrees, heels drawn back so they sit just behind your kneecaps. That heel position is what loads the muscle instead of the momentum. Arms crossed on your chest, now lean your chest forward until your nose is over your toes, and from that position drive up as fast as you can, pushing the floor away through your heels, standing completely tall with your hips fully open. Then sit back down slowly. 3 full seconds. Controlled. No dropping. Fast up. Slow down. 5 of those is 1 set. Rest 90 seconds. Properly 90, count it. Because the fast units need that long to recover, and a rushed second set trains the slow ones again. 3 sets. Twice a week with at least 48 hours between sessions, and no more than 3 sessions, because the recovery is neural, and neural recovery is slower than muscular recovery. If you cannot stand without using your hands, do not skip this, and do not force it. Put 2 firm cushions on the seat to raise your starting height. Use your hands for as long as you need, and remove 1 cushion when 5 repetitions feel controlled. If 5 fast stands feel easy after 3 weeks, hold a 4-kilogram bag of rice against your chest, rather than adding more repetitions. More weight, still 5. Never more than 8, because the moment you're doing 12, you've turned a power drill back into an endurance drill and you're feeding the base load again. If that one instruction, fast up, slow down, 5 only, 90 seconds rest, was new to you, hit like. It's the single clearest signal that puts this in front of the next person who's been adding miles to fix a problem miles don't touch. 2 supporting movements, and then I'll tell you what I think is overstated in my own argument. First, fast heel raises. Fingertips on a kitchen counter for balance only. Rise onto the balls of both feet in about half a second. Lower over 3, 10 repetitions, 2 sets. That trains the plantar flexors, the calf muscles that produce most of the push in a recovery step, and the tibialis anterior on the front of the shin gets its turn if you finish by standing with your heels down and lifting your toes. 10 times. Second, the step drive. Use the bottom stair of your own staircase, hand on the rail. Place your whole right foot on the step, then drive up through that heel fast enough that the movement feels sharp rather than labored, and step back down under control. 8 each side. Not for cardiovascular fitness, for the specific skill of producing force through one leg in under a second, which is exactly what a curb demands and what walking on flat ground never asks for. Now the honest correction. You have very likely heard that Maria Fiatone's Boston study got frail nursing home residents in their 90s to increase leg strength by 174% in 8 weeks. That figure is repeated constantly, including by people arguing exactly what I'm arguing, and I'd rather be straight with you. The study was real, published in JAMA in 1990 and the follow-up in the New England Journal in 1994, with 100 residents held up. But the original 174% came from 10 people, and a percentage measured from a very low starting point inflates easily. Going from 4 kilograms to 11 is a 175% gain and a small absolute change. Much of the early improvement was neural rather than structural. The nervous system relearning how to call motor units it had stopped calling, not new muscle. The mechanism is sound. The headline number has been carried further than it can bear. Although, and this is the part I find genuinely encouraging, the neural explanation is the good news, not the disappointment. If the first gains come from recruitment rather than tissue, then the improvement doesn't depend on your capacity to build muscle at 70, which is real but reduced. Reawakening a motor unit that's still alive is cheap and fast. That's why chair rise numbers often improve within 3 weeks, long before any measurable tissue change could occur. 2 more honest limits. Protein matters here. The reinnervation and repair machinery needs raw material, and the common recommendation of roughly 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day for older adults is higher than the standard official figure, and the argument between those 2 positions is not settled, and whether the fragmented neuromuscular junction can be restored in humans as opposed to compensated around is still an open question. Animal work is promising. Human evidence is thin. I'd rather tell you that than sell you certainty. What is not in doubt is the direction of the recruitment law. Henneman's size principle runs in both directions. The same rule that lets your fast motor units go unused for a decade also guarantees that the moment you demand high force quickly, those units are recruited, because nothing else can meet the demand. You cannot access them gently. That's the whole design. So here's where all of this leaves you tomorrow morning. Keep the walk. The walk protects your heart, your glucose handling, your mood, your knees, and your capacity to cover 400 meters, and none of that is small. But understand what the walk is and what it isn't. A daily walk is maintenance of the systems you already use. It is not a request for the ones you've stopped using. An unused capacity in a human body is not preserved for later. It's reassigned. Share this with the person you know who walks every morning without fail and has quietly started planning their day around which places have stairs. They're doing the discipline. They've just aimed it at the wrong system, and nobody has told them there's another one. 5 stands, fast up, slow down, twice a week, 90 seconds between sets. That's 4 minutes of actual work in a week, aimed at the exact tissue that decides whether a caught toe becomes a stumble or a fall. Your chair test today is a number. In 6 weeks, it's a different number, and the difference will be sitting in your spinal cord, in units that were never gone, only unasked. Your legs aren't worn out. They're waiting to be called.